So this is community check-in with Misty and Amy. Amy can't be here, so Kate is here.
Hi.
Kate, what's your relationship to the library?
I am a huge fan of the library. I love a library, and I'm a Batavian, and I work at the Depot Museum down the street.
And you
So
used to be on the board,
once upon a time, those
yes,
were an awesome 4 years. That was very, very cool.
right?
Awesome, awesome work to do
We love Kate. We've been to the Depot Museum.
many times.
We've
Can
done
always
many,
come back.
lots of videos. And then one day they were like, hey, for Books Between Bites, let's do this book called Over My Dead Body by Greg Melville. Okay. And then I'm like, hey, Kate's presenting. We know Kate. And we like any chance we get to like get out of the library. So we went to the cemetery with Kate,
That was so much fun.
right?
We had a great time.
And made a video. And then I was like, who is this person who commented on our video? They said the video slays. And then I had to like do a little research to figure out who it was. And it was the author of the book, Greg. Greg's here. Oh my gosh. I can't believe it. So what'd you think?
The video was awesome. It was very comprehensive, and especially for like web videos. But it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed journeying with you on the trip to the cemetery. So it was really great.
It was a lot of fun. And it was my first, I mean, other than personal funerals I've needed to attend, it was the first time that I've just like taken a stroll in a cemetery. So this is Greg's book, Over My Dead Body, not to be confused with the one by Jeffrey Archer, which is fiction. But this one belongs to Greg. Greg, can you tell us about this book?
Sure. So it kind of looks at American history through the prism of our cemeteries. Cemeteries are kind of, well, very overlooked. People, almost every one of us goes by at least one cemetery every day, whether we're walking or taking the train or driving to work or school or wherever. But they're often overlooked. Cemeteries take up about the same amount of space in the United States as Delaware, the state of Delaware. And they are these amazing capsules of art, culture, history, you name it, religion. They tell us about our democracy, about our economics, about our socioeconomics, about race, religion, everything. And they don't lie. There's really no artifice to them. And so when you wander around them, it really opens up this whole it's like a history book. And so that's why they're so amazing, just as cultural artifacts themselves, along with obviously the stories of the people who created the cemetery, who are living forever within the cemeteries. And so there's just so much that goes uncovered that really hasn't been covered. And so I wanted to write this book to kind of tell the story of America through our cemeteries.
That's awesome. Okay.
It worked. You did it.
All right. Thanks. 100%.
How many people attended?
The Books Between Bites was very well attended. I didn't get a final number on that one. I would guess maybe 60 or so.
I think it was 77.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I think it was in the 70s.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
which is great.
Yeah.
Because it gets when I was invited to speak to Books Between Bites, they said we don't do a lot of nonfiction. So,
right.
We're not sure necessarily how this is going to turn out. And I was really pleased that so many people were interested in coming out and hearing more about this new view, or this a view they maybe haven't considered before on American history.
Right. And everyone has a cemetery story of some kind. And it isn't necessarily a tragic cemetery story. It could be that they used to run through the cemetery in their hometown on Halloween and put toilet paper on the trees or whatever it was. But everyone has a cemetery story. And oftentimes usually when I go to some kind of a book event at a library or a bookstore somewhere, I'll start by just saying, okay, I'm not going to talk until at least a few people here tell me their cemetery stories. And all of a sudden the conversation just takes off. And 15 or 20 minutes in, then I'm like, hey, wait, let's, I got some stories too, but at the same time, I'm so just entranced by what people have to say, and the just incredible stories, amazing stories, fun stories that people have of cemeteries.
So you had a job once upon a time as a groundskeeper for a cemetery?
Yeah, so before my senior year of college, I grew up in Bedford, Massachusetts, which is a suburb outside of Boston. It's about 12 miles north and west between Lexington and Concord. And it has a few really old cemeteries that date back to the Revolutionary War. But there was one cemetery that when I worked for the Department of Public Works before my senior year for the town of Bedford, I was responsible for mowing and occasionally helping out digging graves at the cemetery. And that's kind of that is essentially what opened my eyes to cemeteries and the amazing stories, because I would be pushing my mower for hours per day and reading the gravestones and seeing the changes in the landscape and the changes in even the styles of the memorials and kind of piecing together the story of my town, including the names of the families that I knew of or knew. And so it was really just so fascinating to me to be a part of that. And it kind of got me into checking out cemeteries in other places and looking at those histories.
So which came first, the idea to write the book and you traveled to cemeteries in order to get material, or were you a cemetery tourist first and then an author about them secondarily?
A tombstone tourist.
Tombstone tourist, yes.
Well, I've been a journalist and writer for 3 decades. But I never had the opportunity to write about cemeteries. I started off as a newspaper reporter, and then I became an editor in New York for a while, and I generally write for outdoor and travel and adventure magazines. And they really have pitched ideas on cemeteries, but they usually want to focus on the living and having better abs and things like that. And so it's I never really had the chance to write a good cemetery story so I wanted, eventually I was like, I have to write a book. I want to write a travel book about cemeteries that talks about history and is experiential and tells the story, like I said, of America. And I really didn't know how to do it for the longest time. And then eventually, it took me about 5 years to write, but a few years ago, well, I guess it was more like 6 years ago now, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a proposal for this. I'm going to write an outline. I'm going to try and figure out how I can organize it and be able to take people on this journey. And so I had lots of material from many years of cemetery, of tombstone tourism, but then I also did go and do firsthand reporting for the book as well.
Love that it's firsthand reporting when it's like contemporary events, because when I do it, it's like background research.
Yeah.
When I have to do a report, I'm looking at something from 1870, and so are you, but the context is very different, which I think is very fun.
Right, and it gave me an excuse to get out and visit places like Monticello, Jefferson's plantation, or to go to Tombstone, Arizona, or out to Los Angeles and go to Hollywood Forever Cemetery and explore these places and do a little more research and be able to pull out some of the first person experiences. But as you know from the book, I also draw from past experience as well with my family and dragging them along to cemeteries, and they're not usually as excited to go to these places as I am, because they're crazy and I'm not. And so
we'll join you though. We'll be crazy too.
Good. And so I try and kind of mix the history with the first person travel narrative.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that as I was reading through it's really nicely like wrapped up in your own experience. Almost every chapter seems to start and end with your own connection to the space that you're in. Right.
And just for people who haven't read it, the narrative follows basically a timeline from the 1600s up to present day, and how burials have changed and how our customs around death have changed really over the years, and then also kind of the threats that are posed now to cemeteries through the virtual cemetery of Facebook, essentially, and AI, and how we can capture people, perhaps immortalize them digitally. And then along the way, I travel to these different places some cemetery that was founded in a certain year that that somehow played a role in American history or changed American history or really reflected what was going on. So maybe it was the Gettysburg National Cemetery where the Gettysburg Address was given, or Arlington National Cemetery, or the burial ground in Plymouth, Massachusetts that the Pilgrims established, and tell the story chronologically, but then also place-wise. And like you said, I begin and end usually with a first-person experience, and then in the middle, it tells the story of each cemetery as if the cemetery itself is the protagonist of the story.
I don't want to hog all the questions.
No, I know you had questions about Arlington.
I do. Well, you mentioned that each chapter focuses on a specific cemetery as sort of the protagonist of each chapter. And the one about Arlington felt really emotionally connected, like really personal to you. Yeah. And I wonder, because my background is in classics. So when you used the poetry line to title the story about it is good and fitting to die for one's country, I'm like, I know a little bit about that phrase. I wonder if he knows a little bit about that phrase. And then of course you did. So it was great. It was great. It was like, oh yeah, you totally got it.
Well, I had to do my research on that, but also, I've taught at the Naval Academy for a number of years. I'm actually on active duty back in the Navy right now. But so that adds extra poignance to it. But that notion, one of my students, they love the Wilfred Owen poem based on that line, right? Dulce et decorum est pro patria amore. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. And my students really love that because they come to the Naval Academy and they're like, yeah, one of the reasons why I'm joining the Navy and I'm going to the Naval Academy is because I know there's no greater glory than to die for my country. And then I give them this poem, which is just laden with irony. For people who know about Wilfred Owen, he actually died, I think, less than a week before the armistice in 1918 during World War I. He wrote the poem while he was convalescing from injuries and then was sent back to fight in the battles. And the poem is about just how grisly war is. And he calls it the old lie, right? And so like you were talking about in Arlington, at Arlington National Cemetery, which is so immensely beautiful. I was actually at Quantico National Cemetery, just south of there, this weekend, as a matter of fact, which is also gorgeous. It's very similar to Arlington. But Arlington has created the creators of Arlington and the people who maintain it have created this kind of Elysian fields, right? Of almost as a recruiting tool. Like, this is where you go. This is your reward. And the words Dulce et decorum est pro patria amore are engraved in this amphitheater where the president every year gives the address for Memorial Day. And it's done without irony. But then people who have seen war, especially if they know this poem, you can't help but look at that with the same kind of irony that Wilfred Owen looks at it with. So Arlington was very personal, and Arlington just has such an amazing story.
I learned so much reading that chapter about how Arlington came to be, how it's been sculpted to create this very specific mythological image. That was one of my favorite chapters, and they're all really great for specific reasons. I was wondering if you had, of the list of places you've gone, is there one where you would prefer to end up?
So I think that for me, I'm still trying to figure out what my final choice will be. The end of the book kind of goes into that, and I don't want to give it away because everyone's going to read it. They're going to get it from the library, right? But I think that my wife will just mulch me if it's up to her. So it might be human composting.
You'll be a rose bush.
Yeah, but as of right now, I think that I'm not interested necessarily in having a a stone somewhere and a burial place. And so I'm thinking either cremation or natural option, and maybe my ashes being spread in a place that's meaningful to me and my family. It doesn't mean that I don't love cemeteries and what they stand for and everything like that, which I get in. I don't want to get too much into the very final chapter, but yeah, I think that would be ultimately. I mean, there are places that are I'm very emotionally connected to, cemeteries, but they're not necessarily places where I'm going to be.
Fair enough.
Okay.
What was probably like the most difficult part of the writing process?
Every single part of it.
Okay, just checking.
There's nothing easy about writing. And if there's someone who is really good at writing and it's really easy, I hate them.
And this is a veteran in the field, somebody who's done it a long time.
Yeah, and so what I really set out to do, because this was kind of such a passion project, my goal was to just leave it all out on the field, kind of, like I wanted, and I'm not calling this a work of art necessarily, but no creative work is ever finished. You just stop working on it, right? So, so I worked really hard, but the most difficult thing, the thing that took me the longest time, was organizing it, like how to tell these stories in a logical order. And so it took me years. I had already, had a book deal with a publisher, and I was already in the midst of writing it when I finally kind of came upon, like I've already mentioned, kind of the chronological order and telling the story of one cemetery, but then kind of zooming out to tell a broader historical picture with each one, and then incorporating other cemeteries. And once I did that, all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is exactly how I have to do it. And this makes perfect sense. But it took literally years to figure out how to organize, how to create a narrative arc for this book.
How did you process the failures along the way? Was it like, this is a good stepping stone here, I've almost got it? Or was it like, this, throw it in the garbage, this is ridiculous?
Well, it's as a writer of 30 years, for magazines, and I've written literally thousands of articles. I learned not to be too sentimental about anything. Like the cliche goes, that you have to be willing to kill your darlings, right? Yeah. And so I was willing to do that. I'm more ruthless and cruel about my writing than anyone else can be. And so when I'm in the writing process, I'm completely insufferable, and my family hates me. And so, I actually threw out the first chapter of the book, which starts in Jamestown, and goes into the history of burials and everything within, while first talking about kind of the natural methods of burial at Jamestown, and how they were trying to hide their bodies from indigenous people who lived around there, because they didn't want people to know the casualties that they were suffering, and then also that they resorted to cannibalism to survive in Jamestown. But I didn't know if it started with a big enough bang, and so I was like, I'm throwing it out. And so then I had given my editors at Abrams chapters of the book, just so they knew that I was actually writing it. And just in case I was going to be a little late on my deadline, they'd be like, well, he is actually writing it. And so I finally gave them the manuscript, and they, like a day later, my editors emails me back and says, where's Jamestown? I was like, oh, I killed it, I didn't like it. And they're like, no, you got to put Jamestown in.
You got to put it back in.
You got to really do. And I was like, oh, okay. And I put it back in. But yeah, all kinds of sections and places where I ruthlessly cut and then maybe added back in or put somewhere else.
That is such a ruthless chapter. It is blunt in the way that you sort of talk about in the book, is, dead bodies.
First chapter.
It's right up at the front.
Yeah.
Dead bodies don't lie. Cemeteries don't lie. They tell you the truth, even when the truth isn't pleasant to look at.
Wow.
That is true. It's a really good one.
Thank you.
What does your family think about the book?
Now that
So
you've done
I have two kids. They're now in college. Neither of them has read it, but they like to give copies to their teachers. I don't know if they think it gives them street cred or whatever. My wife has read it about 72 times. It's probably pretty close to being memorized because she's my first editor. And sometimes people say that I made her too much of the straight man in this. Like my humor bounces, I use her to bounce my humor off of, like I'm the goofball and she's the organized, serious one, but I'm the goofball and she's the organized, serious one. So, but she's always a good sport about my writing. And my family, it's more about they don't like me, they don't like being taken on the side trips for research.
Mm.
So it usually involves bribery. Fair
Well,
enough.
Kate'll go with you.
Yeah. Do you have successful bribes with your family? What works well?
It usually
Don't need the
involves
No,
She'll
you
just
don't,
go.
but
no,
Yeah.
yeah, it usually involves ice cream. There's usually an
Oh.
ice cream place scoped out afterwards. Sometimes when we travel, I'll go by myself. I'll cut out in the morning or whatever. We were in Acadia National Park a year ago. My son was very unfortunate enough to be alone with me as we passed a cemetery in Maine. It was this old cemetery right on the edge of the national park, and he got cider donuts. So
You see a cemetery, you're going to get some ice cream, some cider donuts. That's not the worst thing in the world, for sure.
No,
you bribe kids to read books with ice cream.
Yeah,
for sure.
Hey, yeah. All right. There you go.
It's a universal.
Yeah. Works every time.
Every time.
I think for me, walking through the cemetery when we were filming, the part that there were like two parts that hit me the most. One was the Potter's Field.
Mm-hmm.
And then the stones that were, like had an entire family from like the 1800s when, there weren't as many cures or, they probably didn't have as much access as we do to healthcare.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That just, especially the Potter's Field, I was just like, wait, there's one right, like it's real. It's right here in Batavia. There's one.
Mm-hmm. It's so it's funny you mentioned Potter's Fields. Sometimes I get asked, what is the most meaningful cemetery to me? And so I live in Delaware. We moved there a few years ago, and I run with a running group. My wife and I do on Saturday mornings, and once a month we run through Wilmington along the river, and there's a bike path that goes by a women's prison and by the state Potter's Field. And there are actually a few different Potter's Fields. And for people who don't know what a Potter's Field is, it's basically a place of burial for people who can't necessarily, who either the unclaimed dead or people who have families who can't afford burials. Perhaps they were incarcerated, perhaps they were institutionalized, or perhaps they just had bad luck. And so this one section in this one area of the Delaware Potter's Field, there are just small concrete markers with numbers on them, because even in death, somehow these people have been stripped of their humanity, for lack of a better term, and so you just want to. So I usually stop by, just for a few minutes among these markers and among these graves, just to give these people agency. And to me, the Potter's Fields that are around here, there's one that's a little bit further down the bike path that people don't know about, that I sometimes take the runners down, and half of it's been buried by Interstate 95. They just put the interstate right over the Potter's Field, didn't move the graves, and it says so much about us. The Potter's Fields do. Cemeteries are charity, or cemeteries are nonprofits, but they're not charities. Most of them don't have cut rates for families who can't afford it, or a place to bury the unclaimed dead. And this isn't in every case, but it's almost in 99% of the cases. And we put people in potter's fields, and we place potter's fields in places where we don't have to see them. We don't have to think about them. And yeah, like you were saying, it really, there's so much meaning and symbolism behind these places where these people are buried that I find it very impactful.
One of the things that I liked learning about the East Side Batavia Cemetery when we started digging into that was founded in 1845. Batavia was like 10 years old, not quite. And from the get-go, in a lot of ways, it follows Mount Auburn, Greenwood, some other very popular cemeteries from the time in terms of the layout. But the bylaws and the articles of incorporation they establish right up top that there's going to be a potter's field for indigent folks, and there's no restrictions on who can purchase by race or by religion. So it's a very integrated cemetery, which is not necessarily the default method. So I felt like I learned a lot about early Batavia by looking at the cemetery was set up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can tell a lot about a community.
I would not have known to do that. I would not have known to look at it in that way without reading your book first. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that says a lot about Batavia. It really does.
It's a great town.
Yeah.
We're very lucky here.
You guys should write a book together.
Oh man. I'll send you my research. You can do the writing. Like, based on your recommendation. That's not a job I want. Sounds rough. We're lucky that you're willing to go through it. Thank you.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Now that it's done, it's a lot of fun. No, but the research, everything, I mean, it's what I love to do. And hopefully I told a good story. There's just so much to tell about cemeteries, There's so many firsts, the birthplace of landscape architecture, the first art museums, public art museums in the country, and the first real expressions of freedom of religion in the colonies, and even today, the way cemeteries are changing, the way they're embedded and ingrained into who we are and in our society is always so surprising when people actually take a look at it. The first city parks.
Yeah, definitely.
Are you working on another book?
Ooh.
Well, the paperback for Over My Dead Body drops actually tomorrow.
Hey.
And then and so I'm excited about that. And I want to actually work on some journalistic pieces about cemeteries, about the unclaimed dead, about Potter's Fields. But then also there's another book that I have in mind, but I would jinx it if I said what it was. So I can't. I'm very superstitious about that. But yeah, there's, I wrote a book about 14 years ago about my cross-country travels in a French fry grease powered car.
I have to read that one too. Greasy.
And that was fun. Greasy Rider. Yeah. And so I feel like Over My Dead Body is like a more mature book. I've grown as a writer since then, and as a journalist, I had a lot of fun. That started as a magazine assignment, and so there's another idea that I've wanted to write about for a very long time, and that has to do with kind of national forests but I can't get into more detail than that because I'm superstitious.
That was great.
That was a great exclusive. We're in. Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to
getting it. If you need ARC readers, yeah.
Okay, I appreciate it.
For our readers, so we have 2 copies of your book. They're not here right now. So just so people know, if you have your library card, you can use this app, Hoopla. Look, it's right there. You can download his book right there.
Yes.
Reading it.
Do you have an audio version of the book?
There is an audio version of the book. Yes.
Well, that's fantastic.
And mercifully, I did not read it because it would not be very appealing. Yeah, so it's yeah, there's an audio version of the book as well.
I think it's very well suited to audiobook actually, because it is so much storytelling. It's, it's a great research book for me, but there's a narrative arc to each chapter that makes them very
Yeah.
easy for following along, just listening.
Yeah, and it's difficult for me to listen to because it's someone else telling my jokes,
Sure.
and it's like, but at the
Yeah.
same time, one rule that I have is I never try and do work that someone is trained professionally to do. I never try to think that I can do a job that someone, is schooled in doing, and people who are voice actors are tremendously talented, experienced, well-schooled people. And so I'm sure the person who narrates the book is wonderful, and does a much better job than I could. And so even though it's cringy for me to hear this person,
They're
saying
doing
my
a good
jokes, and then I said to Anne Marie, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not how I talk to my wife, But still, from what I understand, people really like the narrator and how he keeps the pages turning audio wise.
And that's also available on Hoopla, right? Or
I
maybe not the audio version, but
right, not the audio version. Otherwise, that's what I would be listening to because I'm an audiobook girl.
you have an audiobook.
But so I had to read it on Hoopla, which is totally fine. So yeah,
I'm glad.
thank you for doing this
Thank you
with
very
us. It was like so fun to talk to you.
It's it's not difficult to get me to talk about cemeteries or to watch cemetery videos and then write really bad dad jokes about them.
That's awesome.
And there are plenty of bad dad jokes, cemetery jokes in the book as well.
There really are. Really are. There's a lot of dad jokes.
Puns. Yeah.
It's a great way to get a sense that like you're in this project, you're in this book with somebody who's wanting to come along on the ride with you. Like you feel like you have a buddy while you're reading it. It's a great travel book. Absolutely. Love it.
Well, thank you. And thanks for giving me the chance to talk. Yeah, absolutely. Love doing it.
Very cool. We're gonna post this actually tomorrow. So on the day that your paperback comes out.
Wow. All right. Sounds great.
Exclusive.
You heard it here.
Oh, there's bonus content in that, but I'm not selling the book because I'm selling libraries, not selling books.
You can do both.
You can do both.
Libraries buy a lot of books.
Yeah.
They
libraries,
do.
yes. And if you would prefer, because some people for research want to take notes or,
that was very difficult. I borrowed my copy from the library and then I did have to buy a copy as well because it was necessary. So
right.
Understood.
So check out your local bookstore.
Yeah.
There are plenty here in Batavia or wherever you are.
Wherever you're watching.
Yeah. Very cool.
All books are good.
Yeah.
Store bought and borrowed.
Fans of books, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much,
Thanks.
Greg. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
It was great to talk to you as well.
Okay. Bye.